One time for your mind like this. Check it out, yo, gonna kick a flow. Like I'm on the platform that's happening, from business pro mapping to dragging and dropping actions in an orderly fashion. Wow, what I know about invalid checksums, unhandled exceptions, and simulating a test run. These brothers have no clue, like the lack of evidence to step to my plateau. You'll have to climb the precipice. I'm never typical when it comes to flipping the multi-syllables. Cause of my school of thought, creativity's the principle. I burn with talent, prove my fire to be adventure. Challenges as vain as guilty lips to a chalice. Now I'm scorching, yeah. With a painted apparatus and insane formulas, because it's method in my madness.
Good evening, Balisa here. Great evening here in South Africa. In today's little short video, I'd like to show you guys how you can leverage component workflows to actually reuse your logic. So the idea that I came up with was wanting the ability to actually log data, especially the history list, on any item where I might have some sort of Nintex workflow behind it. So if I go into my requests over here, immediately you'll see that I've got a couple of these listed. But notice that for each of these, I've actually got a history column over here. So if you guys just look here, you'll notice that each of these, I've got a history column. And how I was able to achieve this was actually using component workflows within Nintex. So if, for example, we open this first item over here, you'll see that I'll see some of my normal metadata on the item itself. But once this is done loading, at the bottom, you'll notice that I do, in fact, have a history view as well. So I'm just going to scroll down over here. I'm just going to highlight that for you. So as you can see, I've given my users a way of having a nice intuitive history list. Obviously, I can make this better. There was a lot of trial and error doing this, so but I finally found a way that could work, and you guys can actually download that. So what I've done on the other tab is that I've actually opened my workflow. So immediately you'll see that it's making use of a state machine. So obviously this is a simple process. I've got the drafting of my contract, where in this particular process, what happens is my workflow will instantiate a couple of variables, find out who the specialist and reviewer is, for example. And then I go ahead and then based on the type of contract, right, which happens over here in my switch, I'll just mark that for you guys. So over here, let's say we're using this vendor service agreement contract. I actually update the status, and then you'll see that I do a couple of things like log to history list. So this is my component workflow over here. So just to give an idea, I do use this action throughout other parts of my workflow. So if you just follow further down, you'll see that where I actually assign a task to somebody who's the specialist for this contract, I get that information from them. But also, again, if we scroll further down as well, you'll see that immediately right after that, again, I log to history list. So let's take a look as to how this actually works. So if I open this particular component workflow, immediately you'll notice that it's a component workflow. So I'm able to select my component workflow over here. I've got a component workflow that I'm invoking or calling called capture workflow history. And then as you can see as well, I tell it to wait for the component workflow to complete before it continues. So what this allows me to do is actually give my workflow enough time to do what it needs to do, and then it will continue with the workflow that I'm calling it from. And then the other thing as well is there are a couple of inputs that are passed. So this is how component workflows work. So you need to input information. So this can be anything that you need to input. First thing I do use is the item grid over here. So I'll explain a bit later when I open the component workflow, but you'll see it in that step. So what I do is actually just save, I send the current item grid because I update back. And then in here, I've got another field, which is a text called current workflow or current history. And then in there, I just simply reference my current items workflow history. So that's about multiple lines of text column. And then the last thing that I need to provide over here is the workflow history to log. So this is where I get dynamic. So in this particular step in my workflow, I'm getting details from my contract specialist, which is what I've literally put over there. And the second part to component workflows is that seeing that you're already providing inputs into your workflow, there's obviously outputs that you want. So my output is very simple at this point. I'm just getting the appended workflow history. Reason for that is for my component workflow, I wanted to log that appended workflow history and actually see if in fact I'm getting the correct result. You could take this a step further if you wanted to and take that appended workflow history, maybe include it in some sort of notification or something like that. So obviously if I go ahead and I save and I close this, let's open this one, for example. Maybe after this person, the specialist gives us information for that contract, I want to find out what the comments are. So as you can see over there, I'm capturing that information. So how this component workflow works, obviously when you're building a component workflow, it's a site workflow. So what you literally need to do is go into your site settings, for example. So there's click on this gear over here and navigate further down to site content. And then once you're within site content, you could actually go ahead and click on the Nintex Workflow app. And that is going to allow you to do various things. So one of them being able to build a component workflow. So if I scroll further down, going past some of my lists, there's my Nintex Workflow for Office 365 app. I can simply click on that. And then like I mentioned, this will obviously bring back any site workflows relative to the site that I'm on. So I can obviously edit those workflows, delete them if I want to, and then I can also go ahead and access some of those administrative functions like setting my allowed workflow designers, or maybe even if I wanted to, I could use this page to set connections that I might be using in some of my workflow actions. So you can see that over here I've got existing workflows. So the one that I built was this one over here called Capture Workflow History. Immediately you'll see that the workflow type has been specified as a site workflow, and it's got a colon to say that it's a component workflow. And then if we go ahead and edit that workflow, I can run you guys through some of that logic. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on edit. And this is actually not as complicated as you might think. So this is actually a workflow that's got 3 steps, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a very simple workflow. So there we go. First thing that you see is that I get the current date. So if I open that step, reason for that is with Nintex Workflow for Office 365, we don't have a way to set, we don't have a variable for today's date. I know it's a bit crazy, but that is something that we're looking into providing, but that is not there at this moment in time. So in this step, what I literally do is over here, I just set the date equal to when the action is executed, which should theoretically give me the date that this runs. Second thing I do is that I build a string. So this is where I actually take full advantage of our build string action, where all I do is that I take the current history. So remember, I'm passing some data to this component workflow. So if I open my workflow variables, you'll see that I've got a current history variable. And as you guys remember with my other workflow, I could actually pass inputs. So that's one of my inputs. And then just below that, you'll see that the first thing that I actually do is I make use of that current date variable, which I set. And then I've got parentheses as well. And then in there, I've got the initiator's display name. So the beauty of component workflows is that you can actually invoke that workflow and let it inherit metadata such as the initiator's display name, the initiator's manager, and so forth, which is a really powerful feature. So at this point, I just get the current date, and then I've got brackets or parentheses, and I've got the display name of that person, another colon, and then after that I just put the information of what I need to log. So as you guys remember, when I call this component workflow, I pass information on what it is that I actually need to log. And then the last thing that I do is I store all of that information over here into a variable called appended workflow history. And then once all of that is done, remember I also pass inputs such as the goods or the good for that item, I mean. So the last thing I do is that I update that particular item. So this is done in various steps. So the first thing is I go back to my list over here. So I target that list, right? So I've mentioned that this is must filter or must look at my request list. And then over here, I've got the filter where I literally filter the grid based on what I'm getting as an input. And then I obviously selected an item property, which is workflow history. And then I update that column with the appended workflow history as well. And obviously the end result of this is that if I were to go into my legal contract, for example, and create a new contract, whenever I've got a step that completes and I invoke that component workflow, it will allow me to actually see to log that history list and append it, which gives me the end result of what I showed you guys earlier on. So just to give you an idea, let's say we're filling out this form for the first time, and then I select a company. Let's use ProMap as an example. So let's put ProMap over here, and then I'm just going to copy and paste that just to make it quicker. I'm going to use my Nintex email address at nintex.com. And then in here, I'm just going to select vendor service agreement. So you'll see that the workflow history section over here mentions that it's system generated, so which is what we want. And then when we submit this form, what's actually going to happen is any step in my workflow where I want to grab that workflow history will actually be appended, which will give me a nice intuitive workflow history for that particular request. So if I open my requests over here, immediately you'll see that my workflow is in progress over there. So there's my item. And then as you can see, my item has actually updated. I didn't even have to refresh this, but you can see immediately that there's my workflow history over here. So it's picked up the date and timestamp. And then as the workflow progresses, it will actually add more information. So as you can see, it's mentioning that it's getting details or waiting for details from me as I've been identified as the specialist. And then if you obviously open this item, if someone wanted to see what's happening, they could literally just open this and you can see that each line item in my workflow history is being updated. And that's pretty much how it works. I would like to see somebody maybe take this a step further and make it a little bit more dynamic. So what I mean by that is in the component workflow itself, remember you can pass information into this, right? So instead of having this update a particular list that you said over here, it would be great to actually have this update dynamically. So maybe you pass in the name of the list and then have this work. But I know with this action at the moment, it will only bring back the lists that you have within your tenant. But in any case, I hope this really helps somebody out there. It's just a nice little workaround that I thought I should share with you guys. And then I've written a little short blog post on how to get this up and running. And I've also provided a download link to this component workflow, and feel free to reuse this and change it as you see fit. So with that, thanks for listening to my video. I'll be blogging again pretty soon on something cool. Thank you.